Hello, my name is Charles. Happy holidays to all of you and welcome back to my channel. It's been a little while since my previous video in English, and I'd actually like to start this one off by thanking you all so much for the sheer amount of support that video had. I mean, I would have been very happy with like 1,000 views on that video about the pad. We ended up reaching 1,000 likes. So again, I'm super grateful, and let's hope that the channel keeps doing well in the future. And yeah, let's get started with this one. Today we're going to look at the recently debuted Spec 3 update, which introduced 2 tracks and a number of quality of life improvements to GT7. But more specifically, we're going to start focusing on some of the tracks that have been introduced here. I'd like to make a mini-series where I tell you guys tips and tricks on how to master the pad around certain tracks, particularly tracks where it struggles in. And I think this mini-series has become especially important now because unfortunately, Spec 3 hasn't done all that much about the pad. As far as I can tell, the pad hasn't changed significantly, and so it still freaks out over bumps, it's still very slow over compression surfaces, and so it's still going to be pretty bad, and it's still going to struggle a lot on the same tracks that it used to struggle on before Spec 3. And although my main priority is covering the Nürburgring, and I will definitely cover that soon, let's be a bit thematic here and start off with the 2 tracks that were brought in with this update, which are the circuit Gilles Villeneuve on the one hand, or Montreal, and Yas Marina circuit on the other. Overall, I would say that both of these tracks are decent for the pad, mostly because they're very flat. And as we established in the previous video, generally speaking, the flatter a track is, the better it will be for joystick and D-pad players. Now, it should be pointed out, however, that both Gilles Villeneuve and Yas Marina have a couple of sections where the pad does lose time, and a couple of segments where you just have to be very careful to minimize that time loss if you're playing on a joystick. I'm, of course, mainly talking about chicanes and bumps. Sausage curbs and other tall curbs in general are a pretty big concern on both of these tracks, and because they both have pretty egregious track limits, as is often the case for tracks on Gran Turismo, you have to take advantage of them. You often find yourself running over these curbs, and that is where the pad loses time. So don't worry, we're going to look at each track independently and see how they can be tackled. Montreal is all about the long straights and the very slow corners. The average speed is quite high, but the average cornering speed, I would say, is low. You really don't have that many fast corners here. Most of them are just slow bends and chicanes where you just have to get the car slowed down nicely and then be careful on the power on the exit because you might come out onto a long straight like you do on the hairpin and the final chicane as well. Now, if you've played the F1 games, you should note that Montreal is a completely different beast on Gran Turismo than it is on there. The track limits are different, it's bumpier on here, and overall, just the track has got so much more character and feels so much more alive than it does over there. Now, let's see how this translates into the lap itself. We're using the ENG with no bop here because this is circuit experience. And because this car is so difficult to drive and it's on hard tires for good measure, if you can tame this car in circuit experience around this track, you can probably tame any car. So it's a good place to get some practice, especially to practice traction zones and to really, get the hang of putting the power down, not getting greedy on the throttle, and really just gaining all the time that you need to gain on corner exit. Coming into turns 1 and 2, this is a left-hander that leads into a right-hander, and one might think that you're supposed to sacrifice the exit of 1 to help yourself in 2, but that's not actually the case. I mean, you're supposed to brake surprisingly late from what I've tested. You don't actually need to clip the apex all that hard, especially not through the grass. If you run through the grass, I believe you will get your tires dirty. And yeah, basically just make sure that you brake in a straight line before turn 2, get the car stopped, don't run it out too wide because that'll lose you a lot of time, and then just be very gentle on the power. One of the more delicate traction zones on the track, this. We now go from a left-right complex to the exact opposite, a right-left complex, which is so much bumpier here on Gran Turismo and so much more difficult than it is in the F1 games. This first apex in particular is very difficult to get right because if you brake a tad late, you'll ruin the next corner, and if you brake a tad early, you'll hop over it and you'll lose even more time. So very crucial to get this braking area right and to use every last bit of the track, get all the way up to the grass without clipping it, obviously. And make sure you just give yourself a nice clean run through both of these apexes. Try not to hit them on the throttle. So try to make sure you're off throttle through both of these apexes so that the bumps don't upset the car too much. And then you're onto a very short left-right complex. So once again, we're going left, right, left, right. This is a very sweeping track. I like it. Now, just pure commitment and bravery through here. Use all the room on the left-hand side. Set yourself up for this fast right-hander. Skim the wall on the inside. Skim the wall on the entry. Make sure you use every last bit of the road available to you. And then just set yourself up for this very heavy braking zone where you actually want to clip the inside curb on the left-hander before keeping it very tidy on the right-hander. It's very easy to get it wrong and to end up oversteering into the grass here. Make sure you don't do that, because the moment you touch the grass with this AMG, you will start to slide and the car will get away from you. And that's terrible because we've got a long straight coming up. Now, super hard on the brakes. Don't money shift here. It's not good in a car like this. And onto a right-left segment, which is, in my opinion, the hardest part of the track. Out of all the corners and all the sections, I think this one is the most difficult because you have to brake at exactly the right time. Try not to clip the first sausage curb. So on the right-hander, try not to hit the sausage curb. But of course, make sure you set yourself up nicely, because for this slightly quicker left-hander, you actually have to ride the sausage curb. Not just touch it, but ride it. You have to ride all over it, and you can actually take a pretty big corner cut here without getting your lap invalidated. Now, the hairpin. The traditional question with hairpins. Do you brake early, drive a traditional racing line, and then just try to get a good exit? Or do you brake super late, do sort of like a V-shaped racing line, get the car rotated in the middle of the corner, and get super good traction on the way out? Well, the choice here, I would say, actually depends on the car. If you have a car with a very light front end, and overall just a car that rotates very nicely, even while being on the throttle, something like the, all of the MR Group 3s, you can probably drive a pretty traditional line here, so you can just brake early and be conservative. But in this AMG, which has got a huge front end and is FR, so front engine rear wheel drive, this thing does not respond well to mild throttle inputs. It does not respond well to a super, super gentle mid-corner style, so it's actually best to brake very, very late, go completely off throttle in the middle of the corner, let the car run for a few seconds while you get it rotated, and then get back on the power. And after a series of chicanes, going left, going right all the time, we finally come to the chicane. The final chicane of Montreal, with the very famous Wall of Champions on the outside. This is really going to define your lap. Not only because it's the final corner and it's super difficult to get right, but also because if you're playing on a joystick, I can guarantee this is gonna be hell. This chicane is the perfect proving ground for two of the pad's three weaknesses right now. The first being bumpy areas and just bumps in general. That massive orange curb on the inside that you have to clip, that's gonna make the steering algorithm go crazy. And as we established in the previous video, when the controller detects a big bump, it appears to reset the steering, or it just does something that loses you a ton of time. And the second problem here is input speed as well. We also covered this in the previous video. The pad is very slow when transitioning from one end of the steering spectrum to the other, so obviously in a chicane like this one, it's always going to lose a bit of time. The ideal way to do this chicane is to hop over the first curb and then not even touch the second sausage. So basically do all of your corner cutting on the first apex and then just get a very clean, very smooth exit on the second one without having to abuse the curb. Now, for the life of me, I was not able to do this on the pad. Now, I don't know if this is possible on a wheel either, but no matter how hard I tried, no matter how many times I went into that chicane, I could not do exactly what needs to be done here to maximize the chicane. And so on my attempt, I ended up riding over the two curbs, and that naturally loses me a lot of time on the way up to the line. My lap ended up being about half a second off the world record, and actually less than a tenth shy of getting into the top 10. Honestly, it was a big shame, but I'm not too displeased with it anyway, knowing that it would have probably been a top 10 lap, and it was a top 10 lap, right up until the final chicane where those two big curbs just ruined everything for me. Either way, it's certainly possible to get a top 10 on the pad here in Circuit Experience, so if you do manage to get it, please let me know in the comments. Now on to Yas Marina, which can be a bit surprising of a track. I mean, I was already expecting it to have the track limits that it has, which are just horrendous and even worse than Gilles Villeneuve's. But again, because this was expected and because we are on Gran Turismo, I suppose we're kind of used to it at this point. And I have to admit, Yas Marina has actually surprised me pretty positively with how fun it can be to drive. In an unstable car like this Ferrari 296 without bop, should be said, obviously the 296 with bop is on rails. It's super easy to drive, but when you drive this without bop, like you do in Circuit Experience, Yas Marina has actually a lot of fun because on most of the corners, the car wants to snap from under you. It wants to oversteer and you have to stop it, so that actually brings a decent layer of challenge onto the track. Approaching turn 1, there are 2 points of contention here. The first being that there are no track limits on the inside. You can drive all the way up to the wall, although I wouldn't advise doing this in a racing situation because it might be difficult to get consistently. And the second point of contention is not running wide on the exit and catching that AstroTurf. Of course, the reason you shouldn't try to corner cut this super egregiously all the time is because if you get it wrong, you're going to run over that big orange sausage curb that's right on the apex, and that's going to cost you time. It's going to make your car bounce, and it might even send you wide into the AstroTurf. Track limits are pretty lenient at turn 2, but actually quite strict at turn 3. You got to be careful not to run wide with all 4 tires, at least in Circuit Experience, though in Sport mode you really don't have much more room than that. You get a few extra pixels, and then if you go beyond that, then the game flags you and gives you a penalty. Into turn 4, you have a choice. Basically, you can either brake super late, run it out wide, and then straighten the car out a lot for the exit. In other words, lose a lot of time in the middle of the corner, but then give yourself a good exit. That's a good idea if you're attacking someone, for example. And then the other choice you have, which is a little bit faster in my opinion, is to just run a more standard, a rounder racing line and try to clip or almost clip the curb on the inside there. Though, do be careful because it can really upset the car on the exit. Either way, try to put your power down in a straight line, particularly in a car as difficult as this. The chicane at the end of the first back straight is quite possibly the worst point in the entire track for the pad because you have to hop over 2 curbs. And as we know, that is right where the pad loses time. I mean, I was doing this in a league race just the other day, and although I felt decently competent in every other section of track, on this chicane, I always lost time, regardless of how I did it. So, you gotta brake as late as you dare, not too late, because if you do, you'll either run it out wide, or even worse, hop over the curb. So, you gotta brake at exactly the right time, bring the car in, abuse the track limits on the first apex while you hit the bollard, and then set yourself up for the second one, which ideally you have to hit without being on the throttle. If you look at my inputs here, you'll see that I blip the throttle very quickly just to make sure that the second bump doesn't unsettle the car. And that way, when I'm out of the second apex, I can just put my power down gently and off we go. Now into the second half of the lap, we have this very long, very sweeping, slightly cambered left-hander, which was actually reprofiled in 2021. It's one of the several sections of track that were changed. And here, just as we did on the previous left-hand sweeper, we kind of have a choice. We can either brave it on the brakes, brake super late, go down into first gear, and then get good traction out of it, or we can just drive a more conventional racing line. And, of course, that'll force us to be a bit more careful on the exit because it won't be as straight. Now onto this very complex and frankly very strange-looking triple apex right-hander to get us into the hotel section. If you're running a rearward brake bias, you're going to notice it the most here, which is why I recommend it. I think this is where you're going to notice that the car really wants to rotate if you're running the rear brake bias. And here you have to be super careful, not only in qualifying and in time trial, but also in the race. I mean, in the race, this is the corner that's going to determine how you take care of your left front tire. Because as you hit the first and the second apex, you start to load the tire. It starts to heat up, and that kind of determines how well the car responds coming into the apex, into the final one. Notice how my brake input coming into that third apex just isn't that big. You really don't want to brake hard coming into here because, again, you're braking under load. You're not braking in a straight line, and so if you slam on the brakes, you're just going to go straight, and that's not going to work for you. So, again, very smooth, very gentle braking here, and just let the car feed nicely into the corner. And now we've got a series of several bends that are all more or less the same. You can abuse them a little bit on the inside by hitting the bollard, but you have to be careful not to ruin the next one. You have to be careful to always set yourself up for the next one. You know, very careful when you're under the hotel touching that big curb. And of course, very careful on the next one as well, when you exit in third gear, not to lose the rear end. Just 2 more corners now, just hold your breath. Abuse track limits once again on the penultimate corner and run it all the way out wide, almost to the point where all 4 of your wheels leave the other end of the curb. But if you keep it inside the track and if you keep it tidy, then you'll have set yourself up nicely for the final corner where you can once again abuse the track limits, hit the bollard on the inside, use all the room on the outside, and just keep it super gentle on the power, especially if you're not running TCS, to get you across the line. That'll get us a lap time of 150.1. Pretty decent, about half a second off the world record, and that's considering that I probably didn't abuse the track limits quite as much as I could have in certain areas. But this still isn't the fastest pad lap you're going to find out there, because Calster is actually in the top 10, and assuming he's done this on the pad, which I think he has, then he's got an even quicker lap to offer, and actually he's made a video on this, so go check it out. either way, that'll be it from me. I think both of these tracks are positive for the pad. I mean, as far as circuits are concerned, and considering all the characteristics that go into making a track, I think both Gilles, Villeneuve, and Yas Marina are solid tracks for the pad. You're going to be able to be competitive on them without much issue. But of course, know that you're still going to have that tiny little handicap that often comes with chicanes and big bumps. Either way, have a lot of fun with these two tracks because you can tell Polyphony has put a lot of love into making them. So enjoy Spec 3. Keep doing the power pack, which I might cover in the future, actually. There's a couple of pretty interesting races in there. And overall, just keep having fun with GT7, which is evolving a lot better than I was expecting. I have to say, I wasn't even expecting Spec 3 to be a thing. So the day it was announced, I was very happy. And although the pad hasn't been fixed, we still have to appreciate the fact that this game is going strong well over 3 years after its release. So either way, again, that's it from me. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.